A heck of a piece the other day in which you end by saying it appears Americans are, in your words, destined for many years of turmoil and persistent uncertainty. Doesn't sound like a bullish view.
You know, it's where to start. I've not spoken to you guys for a while. You know, it's hard to understand, especially having lived in the US twice, quite what you guys are trying to do to yourselves in many ways. Does the US want to have continued increases in all its citizens' wealth, or is it just obsessed about being the biggest at everything in the world? Because that's, you know, in some ways that's at the core of whatever weird thing it is driving Trump to be obsessed with this tariff thing, in addition to aspects of his personality. But the idea that this kind of approach can bring all these wonderful things back to the US and not cause significant damage to the amazing increase in US wealth the past 40, 50, 60 years is just kind of crazy. Right. But it does mean other countries, which is at the core of the piece I wrote, have to think very differently than most of our lifetimes. That, you know, maybe the idea of respecting or being part of a US-based rules global order, and with it, benefiting from trying to help the US consumer get the best goods at the most affordable prices, those days are over, and they've got to start thinking about having bigger and better trade relationships with the rest of the world and doing more to boost their own economies.
All right. Although your piece points out that rearranging new trade deals is hard. And if they were easy, it would have been done already. I wonder how much friction you think a rebalancing could withstand.
I mean, since I wrote it, an additional part of it is going through my head more and more. I can only imagine that in these negotiations that are now going on with the US, with the supposed 75 countries or however many it is, the US will be trying to stipulate some kind of bits in there about don't do stuff with China or else. And, you know, that in itself has pretty important consequences for other countries that are trying to do things with other people. Let me add, Carl, the big thing, I remember I often used to debate this with a sadly ex-departed Goldman colleague who was at the core of everything to do with World Trade Organizations, Peter Sutherland. But at the end of the day, it is countries' relative rates of domestic demand growth that has a bigger impact on trade than trade rules, even though obviously trade rules are really important. And that's the other part of the piece I wrote, that what is interesting in any case, or maybe partly because of people's fear of where Trump was going with the US, Germany has made a big shift in the past 3 months, or 2 months, should I say, with the new government. And it looks to me like the Chinese are itching to come up with a big, more substantive, fruitful domestic consumption stimulus. And those kind of things from two of the economies that, amongst the few that really matter globally outside the States, they're the sorts of things that will be relevant to trade for so many other countries. And they're things that should happen.
Sorry, it's David. Jim, I am curious about your view of China. I mean, there seems little doubt that the Chinese economy will also suffer as a result of this tariff trade war. But I'm curious as to what your expectations in terms of how the Chinese are going to respond, given it is an autocracy, the ability to obviously withstand a lot of pain. You know, how do you see it playing out?
Well, actually, David, something interesting that I've focused on a bit more in the last week and I hadn't fully realised. Quite a couple of people I know that have spent some time there recently and speaking specifically to people in the real estate sector happen to be of the view that the Chinese are through the worst on that. And first of all, if that's true, that's quite remarkable because it'd be the first big country that's managed to deal with a massive real estate problem without colossal pain. But more importantly, in this context, that probably gives them more confidence that they're capable of dealing with huge challenges. And it looks to me as though they're playing this both sort of tactically with, you know, is there any sort of consistency and logic behind what the US is throwing at them? And then secondly, what level of policy response domestically should we do quickly, or should we wait to see how other countries are going to go on these trade relationships, and whether we can be part of what our own Prime Minister might encourage with many others, what he's calling the coalition of the willing, not just on supporting Ukraine, but also in international trade. And I think they're probably trying to judge that at the moment. But my guess is they're probably feeling quite confident, which is possibly dangerous, that they can cope with this better than the US can.